Chris Martin does not believe Jungkook and Taehyung's relationship was ever forbidden. Before we dive into the heart of this storm, we must ask a fundamental question that has lingered in the minds of millions for years. Was the relationship between Jungkook and Taehyung ever truly forbidden? Or was the world simply not ready to understand the depth of what was unfolding right in front of its eyes? To find the answer, the story does not begin in the practice rooms of Seoul or the corporate offices of the K-pop industry. It starts thousands of miles away, under the vast canopy of stadium lights that felt more like constellations than spotlights. It begins in that electric moment when BTS and Coldplay shared a stage, and for a brief, transcendent window of time, two global musical universes overlapped. Standing there was Chris Martin, a man who has built a legendary career on writing songs about love without borders, about human connection that transcends labels and definitions. He watched BTS not merely as headlines, not as the biggest boy band in the world, and certainly not as idols bound by contractual obligations. He watched them as artists. He watched them as people. According to those who were close to these specific moments of collaboration, Chris Martin never bought into the prevailing narrative that the bond between Jungkook and Taehyung was something dangerous, something secret, or something forbidden. To his eyes, it simply was. That belief alone changes the entire complexion of the story. It challenges the very foundation of the rumors that have swirled for a decade. For years, fans have whispered in the corners of the internet. Cameras have been slowed down to capture fleeting glances. Ordinary gestures, a hand on a shoulder, a shared look across a stage, were replayed, endlessly analyzed frame by frame, and turned into complex theories, timelines, and heated debates that have split entire communities. The world focused on the minutiae, Jungkook leaning in closer than necessary, Taehyung lingering a second too long in his gaze, a burst of laughter between them that felt private and exclusionary to the rest of the room. In public spaces, and particularly in the rigid, structured world of idol expectations where every movement is choreographed and scrutinized, those moments felt almost rebellious. They felt like glitches in the matrix of perfection. But the question remains, were they ever actually crossing a line? Or were we, the audience, projecting our own fears and desires onto something that was purely genuine and deeply human? This is why Chris Martin's perspective matters so profoundly. He views this dynamic from a completely different center of gravity. He comes from the history of Western music, a lineage where creative partnerships and intense emotional closeness between men have often fueled some of the greatest art ever made. When Chris looks at a band, he might think of the intense, world-reshaping bond between John Lennon and Paul McCartney, whose connection was so profound it altered the course of modern music. He might think of Freddie Mercury, whose very presence defied categorization entirely. In those histories, closeness between male bandmates was not something to be hidden or managed by a PR team. It was the source of their power. It was the engine of their creativity. When Chris Martin looks at Jungkook and Taehyung, he doesn't see a rule being broken. He sees chemistry. He sees trust. He sees a shared emotional language that artists recognize instantly in one another. And that is precisely where the tension begins. The disconnect arises because K-pop is not just music. It is a system. It is a carefully engineered universe where images are curated with surgical precision, narratives are controlled to the letter, and ambiguity is often treated as a threat to the brand. In this ecosystem, fans are tacitly taught what to expect. They are conditioned on what to celebrate, and sometimes, they are taught what questions they should not ask. So when Jungkook and Taehyung moved in ways that felt unscripted, laughing too freely, holding on to each other in moments that felt unguarded and raw, it unsettled that system. It caused a ripple not because what they were doing was morally wrong, but because it felt real. It felt uncontrollable. Behind the scenes, despite the rampant speculation, there were no official bans. There was no written rulebook explicitly stating that this specific relationship was forbidden. Yet, the silence around it grew louder and heavier. And silence, as history teaches us, is often far more powerful than censorship. In the realm of psychology, there is a phenomenon known as the forbidden fruit effect. It is the idea that when something is perceived as restricted or taboo, the desire to understand it, and the obsession surrounding it, intensifies. The less it is explained, the more people imagine. In this vacuum of official explanation, Jungkook and Taehyung became a mirror. They began to reflect not just who they were as individuals, but what millions of people feared or hoped they could be. They became a canvas for the world's projections. However, Chris Martin, watching from the outside, was not trapped in that mirror. He did not see the scandal. He saw two young men who trusted each other deeply. In an industry that can be isolating beyond belief, where fame creates a glass wall between the artist and reality, he saw comfort. He saw a sanctuary, not a controversy. Perhaps that is why, in his interactions with them, he never treated their bond as something fragile that needed to be managed or hidden. To a musician of his caliber, art thrives on connection. You don't dim that light. You protect it. There is a quiet, often overlooked moment during their collaborations and shared rehearsals. The times when the cameras weren't rolling for headlines and the microphones were off. In these moments, Jungkook and Taehyung were reportedly exactly the same as they were on stage. Easy, close, and unguarded. There was no sudden shift in their demeanor when the directors yelled cut. There was no hidden panic in their eyes. If something were truly forbidden, if they were hiding a secret that could destroy their careers, fear would inevitably leak into their behavior. History shows us that humans are poor keepers of secrets under pressure. Anxiety manifests in micro-expressions and avoidance. But what leaked instead was consistency. And consistency is the enemy of scandal. So, why did the idea of the forbidden stick so tenaciously? Why did the narrative of a secret romance or a tragic, disallowed connection persist for so long? The answer lies in our collective discomfort with ambiguity. Because ambiguity makes people uncomfortable. Because society, even today, still struggles to place emotional intimacy between men into neat, labeled boxes. When something doesn't come with a clear definition, the human brain rushes to assign one. We want to know if they are just friends or something more, as if those are the only two options available in the spectrum of human connection. In doing so, the public often reveals more about itself than about the people being observed. Chris Martin's disbelief in the sensationalized narrative isn't loud or confrontational. It isn't a press release. It is almost philosophical. To him, love, connection, and trust are the baselines of humanity. These are not crimes. They are the raw materials of music, of survival, and of meaning. When you strip away the fandom wars, the algorithms designed to keep us arguing, and the endless speculation, what remains is something profoundly simple. You see two artists who grew up together under impossible pressure. They navigated the transition from boyhood to manhood with the eyes of the world burning into them, holding on to each other in whatever ways made that pressure bearable. But here is where the story takes a turn. Because if the relationship was never truly forbidden by the powers that be, then the real question isn't what Jungkook and Taehyung were allowed to be. The real question is why so many people needed it to be forbidden in the first place. That is where things start to get uncomfortable. That discomfort tells us something bigger than gossip. It tells us about the machinery behind fandoms, about how narratives are constructed, and how collective imagination can create barriers that never existed in reality. Think about the scale of it. Millions of eyes watching, millions of hearts invested, and millions of assumptions being made daily. All the while, the truth, if there even is a singular truth, remained simple and human. Jungkook and Taehyung weren't rebelling against a draconian law or a suppressed rule. They were simply navigating a world that sometimes refuses to accept intimacy between men as ordinary, let alone extraordinary. In that context, Chris Martin's observation is revolutionary in its subtlety. He is reminding us that maybe nothing was forbidden except our own unwillingness to see people as they really are. To understand this better, you need to step back and look at the timeline. BTS debuted in 2013, a boy group formed in the crucible of an industry obsessed with perfection. Every smile is practiced. Every gesture is weighed. Every glance is scrutinized for meaning. Every fandom has unwritten expectations about who can touch whom, how affection can be displayed, and how identities are allowed to evolve publicly. Within this rigid frame, Jungkook and Taehyung grew up. They evolved not just as idols, but as humans learning to navigate trust, fame, and privacy simultaneously. They were, in essence, training to exist under a microscope that magnifies intimacy into scandal. And yet, somehow, their bond persisted. It did not survive in spite of the industry. It survived quietly alongside it. Consider the psychological science behind this phenomenon. Humans are wired to detect patterns. We are evolutionarily designed to infer meaning from minimal signals. It is how we survive. This is why fans notice the subtlest touches, the briefest eye contact, the smallest gestures that seem out of place in a choreographed routine. But that same wiring can mislead. A hand on a shoulder might be comfort, not a secret romance. A shared laugh could simply be shared history, an inside joke forged in years of shared struggle. Chris Martin, having witnessed countless expressions of trust and partnership across decades in the music industry, sees what fans often miss. He sees a bond that is organic, not constructed. He sees two people who have developed a profound understanding of each other, a language beyond words, beyond headlines, and beyond expectation.